You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello and welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. I'm your host, Andrew Moses. I've got a very special guest today, former MLB star and SNY TV studio analyst Todd Zeile. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Andrew, great to be here. Thanks for having me on. Love what you're doing.
Thank you for joining us. And this show, my viewers know this show is really predicated on a philosophy that I have, that great teams are powered by individuals who go far beyond the boundaries of their job description. And I think where I want to start our conversation is early in your career. You came up as a catcher, second round pick by the Cardinals as a catcher, and you're asked to change positions pretty early in your career. So talk about that for a minute. And you, in a sense, have to change your entire job description. Forget, performing outside the bounds of your job description. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, that was actually a really interesting transitional time for me. And it was actually a bit scary in a way, because I was a catcher, as you said, but I really didn't know any other position. I started catching when I was about 8 years old. I was the big kid that couldn't run but could throw and wasn't afraid of the ball, so they stuck tools on me and sat me behind the plate, and that was all I really knew. So coming through college, all through the minor leagues, and then finally getting to the big leagues as a catcher, I thought that was my path. And a year and a half in to my tenure in St. Louis, there were some things that were going on politically with the team. They wanted to make some moves that benefited them financially, and at the same time, they were starting to build the team around myself and another couple of young guys. And I was hitting 4 or 5 in the lineup, and they thought it would be more productive offensively if I could stay in the lineup every night. I mean, a catcher can catch maybe 120, 125 games a season with the risk of injury and getting tired. And as a first baseman or third baseman, which they, wanted to move me to third, I could keep my bat in the lineup, and I ended up averaging about 160 games a season over those next few years. So it was something that I said, as I said, was kind of scary to me, because all of a sudden I go from a very comfortable position. I was a guy that could catch and throw, was a good defensive catcher that had some offensive capabilities. Now all of a sudden I'm thrown out onto the corner, and I'm being compared to the guys that are the sluggers. In those days, your sluggers were on the corner, third base and first base. So all of a sudden, Matt Williams or Ken Caminetti or Dean Palmer are guys that I'm compared to, and those are 30 home run guys. Those are Gold Glove caliber third basemen. And I had to kind of find my way, especially over those first few years of making that transition before I got anywhere to feeling comfortable or feeling like I was suitable as a big league third baseman.
Was there a point where there was a particular trick or something you tried that just clicked and it made that transition easier?
I wish there were. I think, having said that, you talk about, individuals that make a team better. And there was some great examples of that early on in my career. Both when I first came up as a catcher, we had all-star catcher Tony Pena was the catcher. We were in a pennant race, and Tony got sat, on the bench so that I could start my career and catch. Could have been a guy that made it tough on me. Instead, class act, worked with me every day, tried to help me as a catcher, and really helped me grow into that role. Same thing happened when I made that transition to third. Terry Pendleton, who had been an all-star and a Gold Glove third baseman for the Cardinals, had been in a couple of World Series with them. Cardinals were upset because he won his arbitration case, and so they stuck me at third during the last 30 games of his free agent walk year and just said, Terry, suck on it. And you know what? He could have been the same way. And instead, he came out to third base with me, worked with me every day, knew that I was lost out there, and really helped me make that transition. So if there was any one factor, I think it was, sort of the cooperation of some guys like that. Terry Pendleton, a great coach named George Kissel, and then my manager at the time, and has become a longtime friend and like a second father to me, is Joe Torre, he had made that transition as a younger player. And so they kind of put it on his shoulders to help me transition. So I think I was surrounded by great guys that were, to your exact point, helping the team with things that they did that were, never even noticed.
Sure. So in a sense, those guys became like mentors to you, and they took it
Absolutely.
upon themselves when it wasn't necessarily something that they were required to do.
Yeah,
And
not
that,
at all. And I mean, use a guy like Terry Pendleton for an example. He sat those last 30 games. He never made, a fuss. He was not happy about it. Certainly, he went and signed as a free agent with the Atlanta Braves. Had a little fire under his armor at that point, and ended up winning the National League MVP the next year. So you never know what things motivate people or what's going on behind the scenes. And I think it's really interesting that you look at that as a part of your sort of mantra in this show. And because there are a lot of individuals, all pulling the tarp or all trying to pull on the same side of the rope, and sometimes it goes unnoticed, but it's got more impact than you would ever know.
sure. And your career, phenomenal hitter. You have over 2,000 career hits, over 250 career home runs, and you played for a lot of teams and a lot of organizations. Can you talk about that for a minute in the transition? Obviously, I think it was 11 teams over your 16 years in the big leagues, but you were continuously making an impact. So how did you navigate adapting, to the different organizations, the different clubhouses, and always find a way to produce?
It's interesting because I think the first trade was one that, in some senses, I brought upon myself. I'm going back to the Cardinal days, and it'd be too much time to get into all the details, but suffice to say, ownership had changed, the complexion of the team dynamic had changed, and there were some things going on that I opposed as a player rep, as a player that represented our team, and as a guy that was, sort of in the front lines again with August Busch at the time, who was the son of August Busch the second, that ran the team for so many years. And he just didn't like baseball. He wanted that team gone. He wanted to kind of make his impact and move on. So I ended up getting traded to the Cubs. That one was sort of the first for me to see, hey, okay, put on a different uniform, but still playing the same game. There's a lot of transitions, getting used to new teammates, new manager, ballpark, city. And then, other times when I made those moves, it was voluntary. There were some off-season moves. I went to some teams that I knew needed, some offensive production. But you know what? It's never easy. It's never easy. And I have to be, frank here. For the guy that gets traded, you've got 72 hours to show up, put on a different uniform. But at the same time, you know what? You grab a bag, you get a new uniform, you get a new locker, you go out and you play the same position. You go up against the same guys you've been facing, and it's the same game. It's really tough on the family. It really is a tough transition when you get bounced around. But the family, if you finally get settled in a place that you think is going to be home, kids are in school potentially or enjoying their summer vacation, and then, before you know it, you're up and moved. So, you know what? There were some easy ones and there were some tough ones. And I think before we went on, we were talking about right now being the anniversary of a trade that Mike Piazza ended up going from the Marlins to the Mets. 8 days before that, Mike and I got traded from the Dodgers to the Marlins. And that was the most difficult transition and the most difficult trade that I had to deal with in my career. And that has really more to do with the fact that I signed to play with the Dodgers. It was my hometown dream. I had an amazing year in 97. I felt like I was, on my way to a great year in 98. There was no mention of me ever being a part of any trade talks, but I got thrown in because the Marlins were really trying to dump salary. They wanted somebody tradable. And at the last minute, Fox made the deal to add me to that trade with Mike. And, next time I'm leaving, I had just closed on a house in Thousand Oaks. Life was looking good. And then, you're 72 hours later, you're playing for a different ballpark and a different uniform.
How do you talk about, the challenges for the family, and it's the same game, but there's different challenges around you. How do you stay focused, when you get to the ballpark, and how do you tune out all the stuff that's swirling around you to be focused on the job at hand?
I think it's a good question. I think it goes back to sort of, I think a lot of athletes, and it's not just athletes, but certain people that excel in a certain sort of narrow scope of a field have the ability to kind of turn the switch on when, we used to say when you're between the lines or when the lights come on or whatever it is. There's sort of a relief when the game starts and you're between the lines because now you're doing something that you've done since you were 5 years old. It's just at a different level, but the focus is the same on the game at hand, the 2.5 hours that you're between the lines, the competition, the opposing pitcher, seeing the ball hit the ball, all those things kind of have a way of tuning everything out. It's when you come off the field and then realize that, all those things are swirling around you that you want to get back on the field the next day. So I think, like I said, I'm not trying to minimize it because it is a transition for players. Sometimes cities, don't welcome you the way you'd like, or, you go from a place like Kansas City or Pittsburgh, or even with the Cubs where it's lovable fans, and then go to a stage like New York or Boston, you're expected to perform. The fans are going to let you know if you're not pulling your weight. And there's some added pressure on that stuff. So there's a lot of factors, but I think, like I'm saying, it was the ability to kind of get between the lines and get to what that familiar ground was that tunes everything out, at least for that 2.5, 3 hours.
Now, I want to get to some of the stuff that you're doing now because it's really cool in your post baseball career. But let's fast forward in your career a little bit to 2000. You're with the Mets. You go to the World Series, and then 2001 comes along.
Yeah.
9/11. The Mets organization and you players played an amazing role in the recovery efforts, bringing the city together, bringing the city back, emotionally in many ways. Talk about that experience and what, I guess, compelled you and your teammates to step up and do things that probably weren't expected of you, but that left a very lasting impact on the city.
No, I think it's one of the things that I look back on in my career and think that I feel privileged to have been a Major League Baseball player, to be able to have access and impact in that type of moment. Honestly, we were in Pittsburgh when, everything happened at World Trade, and we're coming back across the bridge, less than 24 hours later, and George Washington Bridge with a team full of guys that, had a connection to New York City, especially after that previous year with the New York World Series, and just a real bond with the city. And it was the most eerie feeling to sit on the George Washington Bridge, look downtown, see the smoke billowing up from where the towers once stood, and have a group of about 30 guys on a bus, and you could hear a pin drop. It was absolute silence, except for some of the overwhelming emotion that, came over some of the guys in that moment. So it was impactful from the beginning. And then a few days later, through leadership of Bobby Valentine, this goes to your point again, another guy, Bobby Valentine, that sort of led the charge for a few of us to be able to go down, visit firefighters at Ground Zero, give them a little bit of a break from the day in their rescue efforts. Honestly, I felt like I was a little trepidatious. I thought it was going to be a little bit invasive. Hey, what am I doing? I'm a baseball player. Why am I going down at this moment? But the relief that the firefighters and some of the victims' families, felt just to see something familiar, something that reminds them of something good, I think was the thing that we got most out of it. And as you may know, I traded a hat with a firefighter that first day down at Ground Zero, and I said, look, I'm gonna wear this in your honor, in the honor of all of the first responders in my next game. And the guys that were with me were Mike Piazza, Robin Ventura, Al Leiter, Johnny Franco, and then Bobby Valentine. And they all, gravitated towards that same notion. And next thing you knew, we were all wearing hats from the first responders and feeling like we could take some piece of them with us for the rest of that season at least, and show them, some honor as we played out the rest of that season.
I don't think, anybody, who witnessed what you guys did there, sports fan, not a sports fan, isn't impacted by the way, you and your teammates stepped up for the city. Let's fast forward a little bit more. You're a studio analyst now with SNY, covering the Mets and baseball more broadly. But in 2019, Ronnie Darling, who longtime color analyst for the Mets, has to step aside briefly while he battled thyroid cancer. And you stepped in as a color analyst alongside two very talented folks, Gary Cohen and Keith Hernandez. What was that like? I mean, you had to fill in on really short notice, and all of us watching thought you did a phenomenal job. What was that like from a
I
career
appreciate
perspective?
that. And it was a little intimidating, honestly, at first. I think it sort of came out of nowhere just a week or two before Ronnie decided to step down and have the surgery, obviously, that was needed at that point. The network president called me in and said, "Hey, I want to let you know what's going on, and this is my thought. I want you to fill in." And I was honestly very flattered and a bit intimidated because, as you said, those guys are one of the best three-man booths in the game. They've been together for 16 years, and there's just a rhythm that becomes a part of their second nature that I knew I was going to have to try to find my way into. So fortunately, I think the theme of what we're talking about today is some other guys that really did a great job of helping me get through, what could have been a difficult time. And Keith Hernandez and Gary Cohen were absolutely phenomenal. They were both super supportive. Gary gave me so much help, as calling the game, leading me into, the opportunities to talk about things that were, I think second nature to me, stories or experiences, really kind of to get me comfortable in front of that mic. And then Ronnie from his home would text me and give me really encouraging notes. And it's been great to really kind of bond with those guys. So it was a great experience, a bit intimidating, as you said, but something I really, really enjoyed.
Well, let's talk. Obviously, you're doing great work with SNY, but you also are scratching another itch in your career, which is the work that you're doing in Hollywood and some of the production work that you're doing. Talk a minute about what you're doing post baseball. I know you co-produced Anger Management with Charlie Sheen, amongst other things. Curious how you got into all of that.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird meandering path, and I think fortunately is not a part of my actual current plan, or at least not a part of my current repertoire of things that I'm doing. And look, I got into it because I had some close family friends that were in the business. In 2000, when I was with the Mets, there was a show that I had some friends that were a part of called Ed that was on NBC, and had an opportunity to get behind the scenes and watch them shoot. And they would come to a lot of ball games. And so that sort of fascination grew. And then towards the end of my career, I wanted to find ways to transition. And I always liked the creative side of the production. I liked writing, especially big ideas and big concepts. That sort of materialized into a relationship that I had with Charlie that came from a very weird, random meeting when I was with the Dodgers. I ran something by him when I retired that was, written by me, and he liked it. And at the time, he was still, heavily into Two and a Half Men. Two and a Half Men, all of that, that sort of tornado around him happened with Tiger's Blood and Winning and all those things. And I just happened to be sort of in the eye of the storm there. And when Two and a Half Men fired Charlie, he said, "Hey, let's make your show instead." And so we kind of transitioned an early treatment that I had into what became Anger Management. So I found myself as an executive producer and being a part of 100 episodes that we made in 2.5 years, which was, a very different experience for me and something that I value the experience, but that's not an easy business. And it's, it's very competitive, and it's not the glamour that it's made out to be on when you're sitting at home watching things or looking at Instagram.
Sure. So besides SNY, what are you doing now?
I have heavy involvement with a sports video game company called BitFry Games, and the game is called Ultimate Rivals. It's on Apple Arcade. It's something that was, I had connectivity with leagues and players. I was asked to come in as director of business development and help drive some license deals. And cut to 5 years later, we're licensed. We're sort of probably the most heavily licensed sports video game on the market. And we are, our first game is a hockey game called The Rink, Ultimate Rivals The Rink. We're going to release Ultimate Rivals The Court. You know what? You can check it out. It's the sort of secret sauce of it is we have this over-the-top action, much like NBA Jam or the old Blitz and Ballers and Slugfest of the 90s. So our players are kind of centric, but you can mix players from the different sports. So LeBron James and Clayton Kershaw can come into your hockey game against Alex Ovechkin and Alex Morgan, if you
How
will,
cool.
and
Very
play
cool.
a matchup. So it's interesting. It's out there, and it's another thing that keeps me busy, especially when I'm in New York City.
Well, Todd, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Before I let you go, I want to ask you a question. When you think about all the things that you've done throughout your career, if you could give advice to someone, regardless of what they're doing, what their career path is, what's the one piece of advice you would give someone?
It's a great question, because I think I've always tried to do things that have an interest to me, and something that I think is 3 words that stepson Max just happened to say the other day that I think is absolutely true, is pursue your passions. I think that there's a lot of people that find ways to get jobs and end up in a position that maybe they're not so happy with. I think early on, when you have some flexibility and you have some time on your hands, I think it's really important to pursue the things that you love. And you might be lucky enough to get into a position or a job or some kind of venture that is, dear to your heart and gives you sort of the energy to get up and want to make it better every day. And I think that's especially to the folks that are young and still trying to figure out what they want to do. Find something you're passionate about and go for it.
What great advice. Todd, it's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you making some time today. Be well, and hopefully we see some baseball soon, even if it's just on TV and not with the fans at the ballpark.
I think it's coming. I don't have any more insight than you do, but I think it's coming. We'll be back at least watching baseball, I think, relatively soon.
That would be great. Baseball seems to, always be one of those things that's there for America through any time. So I think it's particularly, strange for baseball not to be here right now.
But they need America's pastime back in some way, shape, or form. I agree.
We sure do. Todd, thank you so much for joining the program, and we'll see you soon. Be safe.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my monthly email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.